really excited to dive into his career and for all you guys to watch along. So without further ado, Ben Falcone, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Sorry, I'm sure if there was a tech issue, it was my fault.
Not at all, not at all. That's just kind of the way we handle things in COVID now. Over the
Yeah.
last year, this is the way that we do interviews. So no problem at all. Um, I guess a good place to start. I watched the film, absolutely loved it. And
Good.
it's such a great idea, just it being supervillains who are kind of the heroes, or not the heroes, but the main powerful beings in the story. And then it takes two middle-aged women to give themselves superpowers to save the day. Tell me about where that seed of inspiration first came from and how it kind of got off the ground.
Well, it actually started because I've always wanted to work with Octavia. I truly always want to work with Melissa, and I love comic books and I love superhero movies, and I grew up with all that stuff. So it was sort of something I've always been wanting to do. And I was reading an article about the owner of the LA Times, who's like a pharmaceutical. He was in the pharmaceutical field, and he became a billionaire, and sort of very quickly became a thing of like, well, Octavia is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and she could easily play that kind of energy of like somebody who figures everything out and can save the world. And I was actually walking to work, which is what I like to do when I can. And I just sort of came up with a really quick thought conceptually of what it could be. And then I spent the rest of the walk sort of trying to poke holes in it. And then I couldn't poke that many holes in it. And what I liked about it was it's a story about friends, and it's a story about love and a relationship. And then also it's a super fun comic book comedy, which is something that appeals to me too. So that was basically the germ of it. And then I pitched it to Melissa, pitched it to Octavia, and I pitched it to Netflix, and we were pretty quickly moving from there.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I do feel like it's kind of a bulletproof, very creative take on what has become the massive genre of comic book and superhero, supervillains. You mentioned Octavia. She was kind of in mind from the get with this. You also have Jason Bateman, Melissa Leo. Can you tell us a bit how the cast came together? I mean, it's such a strong ensemble that you have here.
Oh, thanks. Well, we, the first, I was like, I call Melissa Mooch, just so you know. I was like, Mooch, I think you and Octavia. She's like, yes. So I texted Octavia. She's like, oh, I'd love to do it. She was pretty easily swayed. I sort of told her the thing. And then Jason Bateman's one of my best friends, and he's really just a nice guy. And we're always texting mostly about baseball. He's a huge Dodgers fan, which is fortunate for him. I'm a Phillies fan, which has been less fortunate, but who knows? Maybe soon we start going our way. But we were doing that, and I go, oh, by the way, or I think I saw him just around, and I said, hey, do you want to be a crab in our movie? And he's like, what? I think he thought I was doing a weird prolonged bit, and then he got the pages and he's like, oh, you were serious. I'm the crab. I'm like, yeah, yeah. So that was how that one came. And then, Bobby Cannavale came to mind to play the king, and that was really quick. And then, when we were fortunate enough to get, Palm in there, and, Melissa Leo, and, then we found, Taylor Mosby to be the kiddo. I think it all just kind of came together pretty quickly. It was pretty simple in terms of, these are great people, and they were up for doing it. So we were happy to have them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Taylor Mosby, though, because I feel like she is definitely a standout in this film, and her relationship with Octavia and her growth with Melissa through the whole thing is just great. What was the audition process like for the roles that you did need to audition? And in general, again, our audience today are kind of the working actors of the world. What impresses you in the audition room? What are you looking for?
Well, Taylor, let's see. First of all, just a really, a good performance. People that aren't trying too hard. And I say that not with any sense of like, don't try. That would be the worst thing to take away. But I mean, in terms of people who are super prepared, super ready, but that are just focused on doing the part and doing the best version of the scene that they can think of doing, rather than, if you're able, I think anyway, having been on many sides of the audition room, if you're able to put aside the pressure, because obviously there's so much pressure, whether it's a Zoom audition or whether it's a tape, or whether back in the day when we could go in personally, and once again when we can do so. If you're able to just really focus on just doing that part, which is what Taylor was able to do. She was a standout. There were a lot of really excellent people that auditioned, but she was just so true, and her performance was really just so genuine. Melissa and I were like, oh, this seems like her. And then sure enough, she's great, and she's a really nice person too. So we were lucky to get her.
Fair enough, fair enough. And in the lead up to our interview today, we are live right now with the backstage audience. I did field some audience questions, and we had a question from a reader named Sid Taylor. What's something that someone has done that you disliked in the audition room? Anything that immediately sets you off or puts you off when you're sitting across from a prospective collaborator?
Sure. I can say that. And who's the question from?
Name is Sid Taylor.
Sid Taylor, thank you for the question, Sid. I appreciate it. I think that if somebody comes in, and by the way, I just for the record, I do this. I've done all versions of auditioning, and I've tanked. It's so many auditions. So I think something to be aware of is not to get I think one thing is, don't think that there's like a perfect audition, or like oh, I smelled the whiff of sulfur and it was magic, and like that was it. Like I used to think when somebody got on SNL or something, they must have just done something so beyond. And so I think when I'm looking for people, and I just want someone who's sort of comfortable in their own skin, and sort of like more or less like somebody you would want to just interact with, like at a bar or at a coffee shop, and then they do a really great job. So when things are other than that, meaning someone comes in and they really want to make a statement just with their personality, like really over, just like you can tell that someone's like, I just want you to notice me before the audition starts. I think that can be a little off-putting, at least for myself, or most of the people that I know, just because you want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're interviewing for a job, right? So you want to make sure that you just, and whatever the external pressures are that you're putting on yourself, or that the world is putting on you as well, that you just want to make sure like, oh, like you would be fun to hang out with and work with, and it wouldn't be so much like, oh my gosh, look at what I can do or something. And again, sometimes that's inevitable because it's just part of it's a trick. Auditioning is tricky, but I would say that would be something, is if someone seems like their energy seems a little off, or a little like super aggressive, that could be like, oh, okay. Like, because then you're almost not focusing on the audition, you're focusing just on the person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like it is that balancing act of wanting to make a real connection with the people who are in a position to cast you, while also really wanting the job. But to exude that kind of energy sometimes isn't always to the actor's benefit. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned just in passing, you say that you used to see people who would get on SNL and think that they must have done something beyond to land that audition to get that gig. Looking back on your early days, was SNL kind of a dream of yours? I know that you have your roots in that kind of realm of comedy. Was that something that you were really gunning for in the early days?
It was. I would love to have been on the show. I was not. I did not audition even, but they would come to the Groundlings, that's where I met Melissa, which is a comedy theater in Los Angeles, and they would come. Actually, Melissa never auditioned either. I don't believe. So yeah, that was kind of something I would have liked to have done. And then I kind of sort of started taking a different path. And then once Melissa started hosting, and I would go there and see like so many of her friends on the show and all these great people, it was never like, oh dang it. It was more like, oh my gosh, you guys are having such a good time. And also the schedule is insane. So as much as a movie can be a hard work, I see those guys and they're, they are writing from noon until 6 in the morning or something, and I'm like, this guy likes to go to bed at like a nice 10:30, so I'm not sure it would have been a great fit.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I feel like that's a lesson too, right? When you're in the position that you are, and you're able to kind of look back on those days in hindsight, it's a lesson that maybe everything happens for a reason, that the thing that you really wanted, that you thought that was the track that you were on with the Groundlings, things kind of fell into place differently, and it all worked out okay. At what point did you kind of learn that lesson when it came to a career in the arts, to not be so focused in on the one thing and zeroed in on the failure of not getting it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think probably, meeting, I started dating, Melissa and I started dating in the back in the Groundlings. And I noticed I used to say, because it can be stressful, right? You're going out for all these shows and you're not getting them, and all this stuff. And I would be like, I don't like auditioning. And she said to me, she says, why don't you like auditioning? I love it. It's like part of the job. I want to get the job. So every part of the job is fun to me. And I was like, oh, you're totally making the most, the most sense of all time, which is what she continues to do. But I think, probably a friend of ours, a frequent collaborator, Steve Mallory, said, no creativity goes unwasted. And I think that's a really good thought, because, I was writing stuff, I wrote Tammy during the writer's strike of whatever year that was, 2008, maybe?
2008, yeah.
Yeah. And, I started anyway that process of writing it because I thought it would be a cool thing for Melissa to get a chance to show her talent, and I could, write a thing because I've been writing my whole life. And so then after she did Bridesmaids, that was when people go, oh, we'd love to see if you have anything else. And by that time, Melissa had been writing it with me, and we're like, oh, we do have a thing. It's called Tammy, and they did it. So that was a really eye-opening experience of like, oh, well, you can be working on stuff that doesn't have an immediate path, and then sure enough, you've got it, in the future. So that was one where I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm a writer. And then we couldn't get any directors, and so then I was like, hey, should we direct it? And then Melissa couldn't direct it because she was going to go do, I think, Identity Thief. And so they were like, oh, well, you can direct it. I'm like, what? Okay. So it sort of became this thing where, and by the way, though, I had been directing at the Groundlings and doing really preparing too, and working really hard at it. But it wasn't something that, was like, oh, I'm going to be a writer director guy. That was never, I thought I was going to just be, I don't know. When I was younger, I was like, oh, I'll do the Second City. And then or the Groundlings. And then I was fortunate enough to get into the Groundlings. But I think, just being awake and aware to all the paths that the business can take you and being open to it is very important, for sure. Because
Yeah.
It's only acting, and it's like, I don't know, do you write too? I always tell people, like, can you write? Because you can write anytime, anywhere. You can set your own schedule. You can keep doing stuff. And, also, like, instead of just auditioning and being frustrated with not getting more, make something, make a thing with your friends, put something together. I think it's so easy to say, I can't do it. It's hard. It's this, it's that, which is true, very true. But if you're doing shows, making, shows are hard now, obviously, with the pandemic. But if you're safely making material with friends and collaborators, I think that's always a stronger way to go than just to feel frustrated.
Yeah, fair enough. And that actually goes very well in line with the question we have here from Mindy Shaw. Basically, her circumstances are that she used to live in DC, was booking work consistently. Now she moved just outside of St. Louis with her husband and is doing onstage and voiceover, and then COVID hit. So she's curious for your advice on how to kind of build that community wherever you are. How do you build a network of people that you can create with, collaborate with, and really scratch that itch?
Oh, well, I do think I do think creative people are everywhere. I'm from Southern Illinois, and oddly, some old friends. I have a project I'm kind of working on, and some old friends who used to be in a great band. I kind of reached out to them, and I'm like, would you guys want to try to make a theme song for this show? And they did, and they killed it, and it's like so good. So I think that there are creative people in all different facets everywhere. It's just a question. And during COVID, obviously, what a wrinkle for everybody in it, a terrible one. But I do think creative people are there. So I think it's just a question of, using resources like Backstage, or there's got to be. I'm actually from Carbondale, which is close to St. Louis. I know there's lots of people in Carbondale doing stuff, and so that's a small little town in Southern Illinois. So I'd assume there's lots of people in St. Louis. I think it's just a question of reaching out, and obviously during COVID it's hard, but Zooming with people and figuring it out, and then hopefully once it's safe to get together and start to, make stuff together. I think if you do, I would say Zoom with people, make friends with them, see who you like, who you want to work with and don't want to work with now, so that once it's safe to get up and going, you're ready to go.
Yeah, yeah, very that, very that. Love that insight. Um, Kind of going back to Thunder Force, you're talking about how Tammy was your first experience doing the writing and the directing for a feature film. And I feel like obviously that's a muscle that you've developed over the years. And Thunder Force is something all new in the fact that you're doing action sequences. It is kind of high octane comic book sequences in some parts, in addition to the comedy.
Yeah.
So, what do you feel like you learned as a filmmaker while tackling this film?
Well, definitely one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to make a movie that was a superhero movie that was also funny, not like a comedy movie that was also kind of a send up and sort of lived in that world. I wanted to make sure that we earned our way into the genre, and I think we did. And the way that I did it was I hired awesome people. So I was like, because I needed to learn, and I think it's important. Like, even though this was Melissa and my fifth film, we're always, eager to learn, ready to learn, and wanting to have amazing people around us who can help us. So this had, clearly so many more, we've done fight sequences and some action stuff in our comedies, but this was a whole new thing. So, you learn that you need, an amazing stunt side, you need previs, you need tons and tons of visual effects. So basically, if you, what we did was we went in saying we wanted to live in this world and we've never made anything like that. And we went to, Netflix and our producers, Mark Platt and Adam Siegel and those guys, and we were like, look, we need help, and our director of photography, Barry Peterson, is great at that stuff. So he was, honestly, he would be the person that we leaned on the most, just to say, what can we do here? How can we do it? And we would look at the previses together, and we would, it just takes a lot more planning and a lot more prep. So we think it worked out well. But yeah, I think sometimes it's important to know what you don't know, and be willing to learn and to really execute what other, if they present it to you, then you can say, I like this, I don't like that, I don't like this. So it was definitely a learning curve, but we were happy to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, it's important as a creator to know what you don't know and to surround yourself with people that can help you along the way. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Um,
Sort of
in
Marvel, like, I don't know how to do this, and somebody's like, or Aquaman, how do I shoot everybody underwater? Like, well, you don't do it in water. That's the first thing. What? You know what I mean? So I think, everybody
right.
got something to learn.
A learning curve, absolutely. When it comes to your approach as a director, you do have a background performing yourself. Do you feel like that informs your dialogue with actors? You have a shorthand, you understand where they're coming from. I'd love to have some insight on just what your approach as a filmmaker is.
I think the answer was kind of in your question. I think because I've had to do it, so many times. I mean, my first job was like, one of my first things was like a Federal Express commercial. And I had to do I had to walk across the thing and then say something like a very technical line. And I'd do it like 24 times or something like that, because I just wasn't doing it right. The camera had to come over and they were coming across a big thing. So and that was probably, truthfully, one of the hardest jobs I ever did, even though it was like a line. So I'm very aware as a director of what actors are having to do, even though I'm not as good as an actor as so many of the people I work with. So it's actually nice because they have a lot more tools. And I'm like, use your tools. I don't have them. Try it. But yeah, so it's that's a shorthand for me for sure. And so I've learned that what I need to keep improving at, and hopefully have improved at, is the camera side, because the people that come from the camera side, they might be able to like, oh, I can make the submarine look amazing, but they don't know how to talk to the people who are like the captains and the people in the submarine. So ever the twain shall meet or whatever. So I think it's definitely, we're all works in progress, but hopefully I'm able to kind of lean on, like, if I was in the sports, I'd be like kind of a player's coach. I'm like, I played, I was a mediocre outfielder in the 80s, but I can tell you what I did. So that part is a lot easier for me for sure.
Well, looking at something like Thunder Force, obviously, had you flexing some muscles that you hadn't before. Looking down the line, what's in the pipeline for what you want to tackle as a filmmaker? What kind of stories do you want to continue telling? Are they all going to be in in collaboration with Melissa, or do you want to break off and do your own thing as well?
I want to keep collaborating as long as I can. Um, it's tricky because you travel a lot for these things. So, it's fun for us as a family and we love working together. We've done separate things. I've done other acting gigs, and she's certainly done other acting stuff. But right now we're actually in Australia shooting another Netflix project called God's Favorite Idiot, where I'm not directing it, I'm in it. So it's more of a, and that's about. I mean, it's couldn't be more different. It's about religious tolerance, and hopefully it's a very very funny look at the apocalypse. So it's as you do, the funny look at the apocalypse. So that's what we're doing now, and then I think I'll turn my attention to maybe just some more straight up directing in the future. But right now, I just like you said, I think it's been 5 movies in around 8 years, so that it's a lot. So I thought I'd try some other stuff where I could let other people worry about the cutting room.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Well, as a final question for you, we have a lot of questions coming in right now about basically just the early career advice of it all, how to get an agent, how to do the audition room. I feel like we've been circling this throughout our conversation. But to zero it down, what's one piece of advice that you would give your younger self when you were first getting your start? Something that maybe you've learned along the way that would have been of benefit when you were first booking that commercial back in the day.
Sure. And actually I was lucky enough that I got this advice from, her name is Summer Mann. We were family friends with Michael Mann, the filmmaker, and Summer. And so she took me out to eat in LA early, and she said, find a community. And I was like, what? And she was like, find a community. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, it's really hard. It's really hard. And she was like very honest with me, because I was like, I was 20 years old and just trying to figure it out. And she just said, find people who have similar interests, who have similar creative paths, because that's who you're going to actually end up working with. And she was so right. I actually got the same advice in the Groundlings when I started earlier. One of my teachers said, look around, look to your left, look to your right. These are the people that are going to give you your first paying job. And I was like, what? And sure enough, now it's so many years later. That was in the late 90s. So that's 20 something years later. But, you're talking about people who are showrunners and really, really successful actors and writers and, people. I did get my first job. Emily Spivey, who's a showrunner on, all these shows, Last Man on Earth, and all these funny things that she was always doing. But she had some tiny, I don't mean to, it was like a little show. I forget what it was called, but I got my first job, like just as a walk-on, like, oh, hey, how are you? And a thing. And that it was because of Emily Spivey, and because she was like, oh, I work with this guy at this theater that I work at. So I think just, putting yourself out there, finding people with similar interests, and then feeling open enough and vulnerable enough to say, hey, where did you, I don't want to bug you, but like, do you have an agent? You're doing, like, I think the thing to do is like to look in your community, see who's doing the things you'd like to be doing, and then asking them, who's your person right now? How did you get to the thing? You just did a spot on a TV show that I would like to do. What did you do? Who's your person? All that kind of stuff. And I think it just starts to snowball as you keep persistent and, keep after it and, keep working on it. I do think that finding people, because people get really focused on, I have to have that agent. And it's true, you do. But I think the way to get it is not just like, if I call the agency, and you have to be forward and try things. But I think it's about making a lot of stuff with your community and learning from them and asking them. And I think and staying on it, staying persistent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, you put yourself within the community. Something, like the Groundlings was of service to you. You look to your left, you look to your right. Those are the people that are going to be helping you down the line, and you'll help them. I love that. Excellent. Well, thank you, Ben, so much for joining us today. And Thunder Force is such a great film. Big fan of yours. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in for this Zoom webinar. We will see you next time. And Ben, stay well in Australia.
Thanks so much. Really nice talking to you guys. You guys for watching.
All right. Nice speaking with you. Bye-bye.